Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 top tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Distinguished Professor Emerita at Boise State University in the States, N.K. Napier has published widely on organisational creativity, innovation and emerging economies over the years. Because life is not just research and teaching, Napier reached out to leaders and managers in other formats. She co-created and hosted her NPR local affiliate's Idaho Business Matters, was a regular guest on KTVB Channel 7's Noon News, wrote for Forbes Vietnam, and continues to write for blogs for PsychologyToday.com and the Idaho Statesman. In the last few years, she has received 2 of Vietnam's top honours for foreigners, the Medal of Honour for contributing to the advancement of education in the country, and the Medal of Friendship for helping to build relationships between the US and Vietnam. After 35 plus years in the academic and research world, Nancy Napier is embarking on something completely new, fiction writing, which offers her the joys and challenges of being a beginner again. And it was really fascinating talking to Nancy because she really is sort of back at those beginning stages, learning everything from scratch. But going through her apprenticeship, thoroughly and completely. She's written 4 what she calls bad novels, but really this is how she's learning and getting better and better all the time. So it was fascinating to talk to her about some of those struggles or some of the things that she learned as a brand new writer that she hadn't even thought about when she was a reader. So she's learned to make that transition from reader to writer. I really enjoyed chatting with Nancy, and I'm sure that you'll find her our conversation very interesting, especially if you too are at that very beginning stage of attempting your first foray into fiction writing. So enough of me, and let's get chatting to Nancy. Well, Nancy, it's lovely to have you here with me today. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for asking.
I wonder if you'd just tell us a little bit about your journey to writing, both non-fiction and then fiction, I guess.
Sure. I've been in the academic world for 30 some years. And as you probably know, in that world, you have to write. There's the old publisher perish expectation. So early on, I had to learn how to write academic journal articles. Before I got into the university world, I worked for a contract research firm and did a lot of work for business organizations. So in that setting, I had to learn how to write reports that were very concise, short, direct, to the point. Mm-hmm. In the academic world, there's a jargon of its own, and I had to learn how to fit what I was writing to the different journals. And then I hit a point, I don't remember exactly when I read some article that said maybe each academic article is read by 5 people, if you're lucky, on average. And I thought, that does not sound good. How are we getting the word out? So the 2 types of writing began to come together. I started writing in a much more straightforward, I hope, clear, accessible manner. And I wrote for journals that would accept that kind of thing. And then I got into writing books that were more for leaders and managers. And once again, that has to be very straightforward, clear, no jargon. And then I respond to opportunities. And I had the opportunity to write a short column for our newspaper. and to do a daily 1.5 minute program for our local national public radio station. So that was on business topics, and I recorded 2 weeks at a time. So 1.5 minutes, 200 words, had to say something, get in and get out. So my writing was getting clearer, I hope, but very concise, short. And so for newspaper, for radio, and then I also do a blog for Psychology Today, same thing, 400 words. So it has to be very short. So the books I was writing began to be much more for leaders and much more concise. And so that kind of was where I was by the end of the academic career. I work for a university that allowed me to do that. A lot of them would not have. So I feel really lucky that I could do it and change my writing style over the years.
Yeah. Wow. Yes. Very varied. That's lovely to have those different opportunities. And I really love that you did say, I will take those opportunities when they're put in front of me rather than go, oh, don't think I could do that. But no, let's have a go at it. Let's see what happens. So now you're taking on a new opportunity, and you describe yourself as a fiction writer in training. So what's brought about this new change and moving into a new sphere?
Right. Probably 10 years ago, I took an online course on fiction writing and failed. And I said to the group of participants, I'm not a good liar. I can't do this. And someone said, it's not lying, it's using your imagination. And I couldn't get over the hump of, I need facts to write about. I have to be able to justify what I've written. I have to be able to cite it, put a footnote down, and put it away. When COVID started, I thought, well, let me try this again. So I took another online class, Zoom class, on writing your first novel. And so I wrote my first very, very bad novel. And
well done, though. Honestly, did you get to the end of that first draft?
I did. I did.
It's amazing. Well done.
It was really, it was not so bad. It was kind of fun. And I gave it to a couple of people, and they said, are you kidding? This is terrible. And I thought, oh, okay, there's more to this than I realized. But it was a great, since then I've done 4 bad novels. As I mentioned to you earlier, I've got one in revision and one that I'm writing a draft of. My good friends will say, why do you say it's bad novels? And I tell them, well, that takes the pressure off. I don't have any expectations yet of it being good at the beginning. Revision, writing is all about revision. So it'll come. But what it's done unexpectedly for me is I've gone back to being a beginner on something. And I'm also trying to learn how to play tennis. But the beginner mind, which we all talk about and think about, is so incredibly powerful. I teach executives in a graduate master's of business program. And that has made me realize that they are very smart. They're experts in their fields. But when I talk to them about a topic they're not as familiar with, I have to remember they're beginners. And so the writing has given me a sense of, okay, try and get this idea across in a couple of different ways to learners, because the courses I've taken in writing, the people I've worked with, they're all trying to do the same thing for me, try to help me understand something, and they have to say it multiple times. They have to say it in different ways. So being a beginner helps me teach others who are beginners. So that's been a fallout that was unexpected from this. But anyway, so yeah. So as I got into the fiction writing, I realized it is so much harder than I thought and so much more fascinating. So yeah, it's been good.
It is that funny conundrum, isn't it? It is difficult. It is this big complex idea. I mean, at its heart, it's kind of simple. There's somebody who has a problem, and then another problem, and then another problem, and then they resolve it, and it's all good. But there's so many kind of moving parts within that, and trying to keep them all in your head at the same time is a real challenge. And well, I don't know about you, but certainly for myself, in other parts of my life, I might find that challenge just to be too much and unenjoyable, and I don't like it. But within the fiction space, I really enjoy that challenge. I kind of feel it keeps my mind fresh. It keeps things ticking over. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle that I'm trying to put together. So I find that sort of duality of it, of being difficult but being fun. I've not
Yeah.
experienced that elsewhere.
Why do you think is different for you in other parts of your life then versus the writing is more, you enjoy it more than facing those kinds of challenges elsewhere?
I think because I find the gratification instantaneous. So even if the pages I've written that day aren't great, I still feel that achievement. I still feel proud of myself. I still feel, oh, that was good. I got through that scene and something happened that I didn't know was going to happen. And I enjoy that that discovery side of it, where you don't know what's going to happen next, and somebody says something that I didn't know they were going to say, and occasionally a new character will pop in that I didn't know was going to appear, and I love that element of it as well. So I think that's what I enjoy more. There is an instant gratification to it, and I feel proud of myself for it. Whereas perhaps in other areas of life, it's been more, phew, okay, I got through that, and no one's died, and that's all good.
And you raise a point that I've heard about all my life when people talk about their characters having a life of their own, new characters coming up, saying something. I had no idea what that really meant. It sounded very, I don't know, it sounded too spacey in a way for me, but that's happening. And I agree with you. I mean, it's just, it's surprising. It's wonderful. It's unexpected. It's one of the places where I lose track of time. And at the end of the day, as you say, there's some words on the page, and they may be bad words. That's okay. You can't revise unless you have words on the page, and the revision is what's going to make it better. So yeah, I'm surprised in so many levels about how hard this is, how fun this is, how I'm constantly learning. So I love it.
Yes. And so what have you found, as you're making that transition, what have you found to be some of the more challenging aspects of it? Because I get the feeling from you that sitting down and doing the work and making the time to do it, that's not so much a problem. But maybe it's been in other areas that have been a challenge.
I think what I keep finding is something as simple as point of view. So understanding fully what that means, and then being consistent. That I'm still working on that. And then, and as part of that, I guess, is how distant do you want the main character to be? So there's this, and I don't even, it's all about learning new jargon too for me. So there's like a deep point of view where you're inside the person's head, but it's not first person. When I wrote the first really bad novel, which took place in Vietnam, and had some people read it, and then also the second one, which takes place in the mountains and people die in this little cozy town, people kept saying, get inside of her head. And I thought, what are you talking about? I'm a very analytical person, and so not as much on the feeling side, and I didn't at all understand what they were saying. Well, of course, now as I'm reading books that I like, that are in genres that I really like, I get it, I see it, but I wasn't thinking that way. So that point of view and understanding what that means and how you, quote, get inside someone's head and what the value of that is for the reader, that's been new and hard for me. Mm-hmm. I've been surprised, and I don't know if I trust this. Several people have said that the dialogue I've written has been good. And that I didn't even think about that, but some people have struggles with that. So I have struggles with point of view, and with, because I've been such a concise writer for so long, the notion of really developing a scene and fleshing it out and letting things move slowly and then speeding them up. I just tend to be, this happened, and then we move on. Mm-hmm. And so learning how to relax and add words. This novel, first bad one, was maybe 45,000 words. And people said, no, it's got to be 70, 80, 90. And so I'm dealing with that too, that to move beyond the very straightforward business, concise, here's the problem, here's how you analyze it, here's how you solve it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what you want in fiction. So
with point of view, I think that's something that the majority of new writers struggle with. I think that's quite a common one, and because we can picture it in our heads, we can kind of see what's happening, that sometimes we do forget to just pop that on the page and share that with the reader. And I think that's something very, very common. So don't feel that you're alone in that. It's certainly something that I've had to learn as well. And there are writers who are underwriters, and then there are overwriters, and it sounds like you're perhaps more like me, which is an underwriter. And so I tend to write very sparse first draft, and then I have to go back in and layer in all those things, layer in more emotions, layer in perhaps the senses, the weather, all these little details that as I'm kind of trying to get through this draft that I don't think about at first. But and then there's other people who throw everything, including the kitchen sink, into it, and you've got this 120,000 word manuscript, and then you've got to cut like 50,000 from it. So there's two different types of writers that I've seen, the over and the under, and it's part of finding our process, isn't it? By, as you say, you've written 4 novels now, and that's how you find your process and the way that you work, that works best for you.
those are great terms. Thank you. I hadn't heard that before, but that's exactly right. I'm an underwriter. Just get the skeleton out there and then start putting the flesh onto it. Yeah.
Yay. And so, and you've said yourself, you've described these as 4 bad novels. So what did you feel? Is it just the kind of the sparsity of it, the novels that you found that you think that they are bad, or is it the getting inside of the head, or is there anything else that you've kind of noticed about your own writing?
I'm not a good teacher of myself sometimes, so I have gotten help, and I've been working with an outstanding editor to lay out the story, and the story structure is another piece of all this that I didn't really think about. As a consumer of books, of movies, I hadn't realized that certain things happen at certain points and how dramatic they have to be and what has to change. And so this, the third one I've worked on, I sent to a woman. I had worked with her before to try and understand that story structure part. And then she took about 6 weeks to do a developmental edit. Again, something new to me. And she came back with a 47-page editorial report. She made 700 comments on a 250-page manuscript. Many of them were the same, where I need to note things and change them. And then we had an hour-long conversation. And what she does is she sends this out. She says, okay, read the report once, put it aside. Don't talk to anybody, not your partner, your friends. Don't say anything on social media. Just absorb it. Then read it again. So read it 3 times, basically, before you begin to see before I could see the pattern she was talking about. And then we had our conversation. And she said, I don't often give that long a report to people or that many comments on the manuscript, but I know that you really want to make this a top-rate book. And so that is an eye-opener. So right after I got that, I had to take an overseas trip. I haven't thought about it for 2 weeks. I'm working on something else right now, but I've reached the point where I'm anxious to get to it now. I'm excited. I'm anxious to get to it. So what she has noted are, and I'd have to go back and look at some of the notes, but some things that in the story structure, how the turning points happen, what happens to the character, how she has to reflect on all these things that I had no idea come into play in writing. So that has been incredibly helpful. So I think money spent, at least for me, on that developmental stage, to get the story straight. Then when it comes to the building on the emotion, the senses, adding in the color of the environment, I feel more comfortable doing that. But it's really what's that story structure and who is this character, the couple of 3 characters that really have to be solid. Mm-hmm. So that has been, again, a really good experience. something I never knew existed. So the different types of editing and so forth. So that's good to find out.
Yes. I'm so glad that you've reached out for help and to kind of, get expert advice on this, because there is this misconception, I think, particularly within the independent space, that a writer writes their book by themselves, the isolated person in the garret. But really, I think never has a writer written their book solely on their own. Traditionally published writers don't. They work with their editor, they work with their agent. But for some reason, I think in the indie space, we think we've got to do it by ourselves. Otherwise, we're failing in some way, or we're talentless in some way. So it's great that you've done that. And I encourage anyone listening, do reach out for help where you can find it, because you need that second set of eyes. You need to have an objective person look at your work who can see what doesn't make sense, where things aren't working and the story meanders a bit, but also to show you what is working and what strengths you've got. And that's just as important to know, to give you that feel good feeling and think, okay, I've got something here, it's worth carrying on with and keeping going with.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I had the same experience with my first editor as you have had. I had no idea that it would be such a lesson in how to write, and everything that she taught me, you then can take it through to the next manuscript and the next. And so with every round of revisions that somebody looks at, you get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. So it's nice to see that was echoed in you.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think maybe, again, I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage having come from the academic world, where you write a manuscript, you send it into a journal, and it comes back. And sometimes sometimes the feedback can be cruel. Usually it's good, it's constructive. But I learned many years ago, something would come back, all this feedback, and I would just stick it in a drawer for 3 days and then pull it out. And by then I'd calm down. And so I was used to getting pretty direct, blunt, sometimes harsh feedback. And so she kind of made that point. She said, I know you can take it. So I think having a bit of a thick skin when it comes to having people read something, to me, this first one that I did, and when I sent it out to some friends and they came back and said, well, she's flat, the character has no, we don't really know about her, get her in her head, all that. I found myself surprisingly hurt. And I thought, no, wait a minute, why is this? Well, fiction to me feels, it's different than, again, the factual nonfiction journal writing, column writing, because I had something to point to say, well, this is where I got that from. But with the fiction, it seems to me, and you're much further along than I am, but it seems you put yourself in a much more vulnerable position because it is your imagination, so much of it, as opposed to something I can point to as factual.
I think that is absolutely how a lot of people feel, that it's a personal slight on them if they don't get it right and somebody critiques it. I think, I've just learned that that's part and parcel of it. And just like you've said, I'll open up my critique I work with a book coach, and I'll look at all of her comments, I'll close it down, I'll have a cry, and then I'll come back a couple of days later and look at it again. Okay, and then I'll book my call with her and we chat it over. But I've had to really just accept that this is nothing personal. It doesn't mean I'm a dreadful person if my writing isn't good that day. And in fact, she's there to help me make it better. So when it does go out to the world, I can feel proud that I've done the best job that I can do and be very, very happy with it. But yeah, your academic training then has put you in good stead for that, not only for feedback from beta readers, but then also, if you're sending out to agents and things like that. And then ultimately, when we get reviews, and one thing I say to people a lot is, remember that Stephen King gets bad reviews, J.K. Rowling gets bad reviews, every bestseller gets bad reviews. Not everybody's going to love the work that they put out, so we're in good company.
That's a really good point to remember. Absolutely. We haven't gotten to the point of reviews on any of this, but it's that's true. So
And so, as you mentioned earlier, you're writing columns as well as your non-fiction books. So have you found influence going the other way now? Have you found that learning to write fiction and playing with fiction has had a influence on the non-fiction that you're writing?
Great question. Way back when I decided to start trying to write in a little more accessible way in my business world, I went to a workshop on creative nonfiction. So that's when I first started hearing about this creative writing techniques and that you could bring that in to your nonfiction writing. So yes, and actually the last book I published with a co-author out of Vietnam, we did a series of profiles of people. Vietnam's a really interesting country, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but I've been working there for 25 some years, and there's a group of people that we call the bridge generation. So these are people who grew up during wartime, and they lived through a really terrible period of famine and starvation and rationing during the 70s and 80s. And now they are leading the country in business and education and government. So to me, they sort of bridge the old ways and the new global ways of this country. So I wrestled with that book for 2 years. It was the hardest thing I'd written for a lot of different reasons, but we ended up doing a series of profiles of, I forget how many, maybe 15 people. And so, yes, the creative writing, how do I describe this person, his or her background, where they grew up, what they experienced in a way that is easier to read and is more like a story. And I've been absolutely delighted. And I've been delighted that people have found it interesting to read, surprisingly so. A friend of mine just wrote a review of it on Amazon. She said, I knew this book was out there and I picked it up and it was long, and I'm a retired professor and the last thing I want is a textbook. And she said, I started reading it and I just couldn't believe that it was so easy to read and informative and fun and interesting and powerful in terms of the stories. So yes, I think that I wish more academics would write in a way that anybody can understand a piece, rather than sometimes you can't even understand the titles of the articles, let alone what's in them. So I feel incredibly lucky that I've sort of stumbled onto the creative nonfiction part, and then now the creative writing to start bringing that more into some of these columns. The Psychology Today blog I'm using to talk about that, how I'm learning to write fiction and what that's helping me in the rest of my life. So back to this idea of being a beginner, being, I hope, a better observer of what's going on around me, and trying to figure out what that might mean in a broader context, all those sorts of things. It's been phenomenal. I wish I'd figured it out 20 years ago. So,
well, everything happens when it's meant to happen. But it is interesting, isn't it, how we think fiction is purely made up. It's all out there in our imagination. And when I'm working with my students who are all writing their first book, they're always surprised actually how this first story that they're writing, it's actually about them in one way or another. It's about their life in some, even if it's been fictionalized and the character is in outer space and has nothing to do with them. It's the emotion, that connection, the feelings, the inner journey that their character is going through, that is reflected in their own life journey and what they've learned in life. And it sounds like maybe that's sort of coming into some of your writing as well. And I love that the story you're telling us about your nonfiction, because again, it's that connection with people. That's why we read. We want to feel that connection with people who are either have something to teach us or who mirror our own life experiences. Even if that is in a nonfiction business book, it's still having that connection for its readers. It's speaking to those readers because they're doing something similar, even if it's in the US and not in Vietnam. It's amazing, isn't it, how it encompasses all different fields.
It's incredible. Yeah, really fun to see and learn.
And so do you have plans to kind of continue merging those two with your professional life and then your author life?
I guess it will. I hope it will happen naturally. Yeah. And so I will continue to do these two little short columns, the blog and the news column. And I hope, continue to use better fiction knowledge in writing those. And so to make them more vivid, more visual, to do that. I have to admit so of these 4 bad novels, 2 of them are based on real situations. So one is, I read about a case in Australia of a woman who was convicted of killing her 4 children, has been in prison for 25 years. A couple of years ago, new research came out that maybe it was a gene mutation, 2 sets of gene mutations in the children. So that to build on that, and so my story is based in the US, but that gave me, back to being an academic, I suppose, gave me a base to say, there's really something out there. There are legal pieces that I can bring into play. There's some science that is new that I can help explain what that is and how it might play. And the same thing on this latest one that I'm working on, which is about art crime and forgeries in Vietnam. But that happens all over the world. So I have had a wonderful time learning about art fraud. And most of what's written about it is in Europe, Africa, Middle East, but very little. I can find nothing in Vietnam, maybe a little bit in China, but not a lot that's written in a fictional way. No fiction, some nonfiction. So in both those cases, I had something to start with, which I'm wondering if that will be my future, that will blend there is something real out there that I can touch and then turn it into a story, as opposed to strictly out of my head completely. I'm not sure I'm going to be very good at that long term.
Oh, don't put yourself down.
We'll see.
I'm looking at your website here, and you've got, forthcoming bestseller by N.K. Napier, The Painter. So are you happy to sort of tell us a little bit about that story, the premise of it?
Sure. Yeah. So that is what would happen if a young woman who's an art curator from Vietnam has the chance to mount an exhibit in the US. And I'm using a new technology in museums. There are certain museums now where you can actually bring the images from one museum to a place where I live here. Very new, very exciting. And so she brings her museum's exhibits, including many of her great uncles, who's very famous in Vietnam, his paintings. While she's putting this thing together, she discovers her uncle's paintings in museums in America. But that can't be, because she walks past his paintings in Hanoi every day when she goes to work. So they can't be real. So then it becomes a question of what's real, what's not. And she insists that the ones back in Vietnam are real and the ones in San Francisco cannot be, goes to San Francisco, and then starts questioning. Her father, in the meantime, it's really a story between a father and daughter. Her father says, don't pursue this. Don't even think about it. Of course, they're real in Hanoi. They can't be anywhere else. And so over time, she discovers that maybe her father is not the true man she always thought he was. So it's a conflict of, does she bring the potential of art fraud up in a global setting or a national setting and say this is going on, versus and risk losing her father's love, or does she follow her father's instructions? He wants to maintain the family legacy, the artist's legacy, and so forth, and so then try to hide it. So anyway, that's the struggle that's going on.
Oh, I love that. Because I love stories about family dynamics and how they change, but then putting that in the backdrop of the art world, there's always a bit of intrigue and excitement and glamour in the art world.
That's what I'm learning. Yeah. Very interesting.
Oh, it does. It sounds good. But I was just thinking of a friend of mine who also, she's now writing her second novel, and again, she likes to choose stories that are based in reality that she's seen somewhere, or a famous person who interests her, and then, because she's a journalist, she really enjoys that research side of it, pulling that in, and then blending it with that fiction side. And I think readers enjoy it as well, because there's that sort of perhaps a feeling of voyeurism that comes in. You're kind of eavesdropping on somebody the real life of somebody, even though we know that it's fictionalized. Or people enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, I was in Hanoi last week to do some business work stuff, and then also the other piece of all this fiction writing is you can argue that you're doing research for your book and go to really fun places. I mean, I knew this, but it's just so exciting to actually get to do it. So I talked to several artists and gallery owners, and one of the artists, very, very well known over there, said, I've been interviewed for 20 years about my art, but it's always been factional. I said, what do you mean? Is it about the materials you use or the topics? And he said, yeah, but nobody has ever written about Vietnamese art in a fictional way. And he said that will help get the word out about our art around, probably more in America. I don't know that this book would sell in Vietnam. But I thought, okay, so it's never been done. That's good. That's sort of the first time, and there'll be many more. But if I can do it right, won't that be great to give the world a little bit of a sense of what's going on in the art world in a place like Vietnam? So,
yeah, yes. No, I can't think of any books I've read about the Vietnamese art world either. That are written for a Western audience.
Yeah. Can you think of any that are either China or South Asia or Southeast Asia, any from anywhere over there?
Not specifically the art world. There's a book. No, only Europe. Only Europe. Yeah.
That's what I'm finding. Okay.
Yay. If I think of anything, I will come back.
I would love it. I'd love it. The other angle, of course, is looting. And that has been written about a fair amount from all over Asia and, of course, Africa and so forth. And so if this works, I was thinking the other day, maybe that's another angle to talk about how parts of Asia have faced the same problems that have gone on in Greece and the Middle East forever. So a lot of discussion right now about museums in Europe, at least, and some in New York, the metropolitan, to send the work back to the country of origin. And what does that mean? And
it's very contentious, isn't it? It's because the country, well, I can think of Britain, definitely don't want to give up some of their biggest treasures, what they feel are theirs now. Yeah. And I imagine too in Asia, it'll be exactly the same. There's the dominant country in Asia that has a lot of wealth and a lot of power and has a growing art buying market. So I could see that would just hits history repeating. Yeah. Humans are humans.
Humans are humans.
Right. I noticed that you're using your initials, NK Napier. I wondered if you were deliberate about that.
I've been Nancy K. Napier in the academic world forever. And so I sign I think on the website there's a place where it's Nancy _ N N. And I've used that as my sign off a lot over the years. And so I thought, well, that's not usable as a name. So I just figure I'll stick with NK Napier to differentiate it from the academic work. When I got into this most recent project, I did talk to a marketing person who I said, do I need a pen name? Because I've done all this academic work on a lot of different topics. Is that going to be confusing? And what if I want to write something that I'd be embarrassed for my parents to read? And she said, no, just use your initials and go with that, because you already do have a little bit of, some people know who I am because of the academic world. So they can translate that over, and at least I've got a little bit of a presence. So I think I have just one or two articles in the academic world that I used NK, but normally it's always Nancy K. Because turns out there is a Nancy J. Napier in the world, and she writes self-help books and all kinds of things. And I thought, well, I need to distinguish from her. So
I wondered if it had been to just disguise gender, because a lot of people do that now, just to
I thought about that too. Yeah. So I hope so. That would also be a piece of it, but it wasn't the driving force.
So I've spent some time in Southeast Asia, and I'm fascinated by your connection with Vietnam. And you've received not one, but two of Vietnam's top honours for foreigners, the Medal of Honour for contributing to the advancement of education in the country, and the Medal of Friendship for helping to build relations between the US and Vietnam. Please do tell me a little bit about that, with your love for Vietnam and what brought about these two wonderful medals.
Well, again, opportunity, serendipity. Many years ago, I had the chance in the early 90s to go there for 3 weeks and do some teaching. This was during the time when Vietnam was starting to open up and had to learn about Western business practices. So it was after the fall of the Soviet Union, which had been their main trading partner, education partner. They found themselves in a position of, we've got to learn how to do business with the rest of the world. So the Swedish government actually funded a program to train professors at one university in Hanoi in international standard masters of business. So I was part of that first effort just for 3 weeks. And then that continued, and the Swedes and then eventually the US said, we can't just drop 30 people in and expect that they're going to be able to help change the economy. So in the end, we trained 84 people, but the bigger piece was, it was a new venture startup within that university to create an international standard business school. So everything from the curriculum, the teaching methods, the idea of doing research and interacting with the business community, all the things that a traditional business school in much of the West would do, we helped them do that over 9 years. And so I tell people I had brown hair when I went to Vietnam, and look what happened to me. But it was absolutely fascinating. So that was the time. And then, you look back and you see how things fall into place. That was one of the pieces that taught me I was an academic entrepreneur. So I like to start things, programs, and that was one. But it was an incredible experience. And so after 9 years, then I left and said, I'll never go back. I was burned out completely. But I did go back, and I ended up teaching for that business school that we helped create, which was fabulous, and did a lot of research with some people over there. And now my university takes our executive masters of business participants to Hanoi every year for a week, and they do business projects over there. We haven't gone since October 19. So when I was there last week, it was partly to reestablish all those connections, and we're taking the group end of September. So in about 3 weeks, we'll take them over for a week. So it's been this incredible connection between universities and now these alums that are doing so well in business and education and government. And so, yeah, I think we, in a small way, helped Vietnam move into a market economy. And it's just been remarkable to see the change in what people have done and how they've grown. And now their children, this bridge generation idea, the children of these people I've worked with have studied abroad all over in the UK, in Canada, in the US, Australia, and they are starting their own business careers or their life in universities. And so I've loved watching that. So I played a little role in it, and the university that I worked with was kind enough to figure out how to do this metal business. So anyway, I'm very grateful.
It's a beautiful honor and a real recognition of,
yeah,
it reminds me actually of the fiction world as a whole, and being an author, that lots of things have helped Vietnam change and move into the modern world, and you've had a voice in that, you've played a part in that, you've been part of that conversation. And I often say that as writers, we are part of this big global conversation of storytelling, of literature. And as an individual, we may never have that Stephen King bestseller, but we're contributing to everything that's going on. And particularly as women, we're having that voice and making those shifts and those changes. So it's lovely. Yeah, how nice to be recognized.
I love that. What a great way to think about writing, fiction writing. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
several ideas today. Appreciate it.
One of my teachers said it to me a number of years ago now, and it just changed the way I saw my place in the writing sphere, and it took the pressure off. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to be brilliant. I just had to be there and be part of it. So it was good.
Right.
It was good.
Oh, nice.
My goodness, so I've really enjoyed our chat. We've been talking for a good while now, and we're coming to the end of our time, but tell us, when might we expect your book to be out, and where can our listeners find out more about you if they'd like to connect?
Well, I think the website's probably the best place, and that's nancyknapier.com. So I'm hoping that the book I mentioned to you about the Australian woman, but set in the U.S., that one I'm hoping to have out by early next year. The Painter about Vietnam is a little behind that. So that I'm hoping for by the middle of next year. And they'll both be on Amazon for sure. I am experimenting with this last book that we published called The Bridge Generation. I'm going to record that. So my dear husband is kindly setting up a closet, and now he's calling it the sound studio. But I'm going to try that so that so many people listen to books now. So I figured that may be another way to offer people an opportunity to read the books in the future. So that'll
wonderful.
Be on Amazon. Yeah.
The future is bright. My goodness, you've got lots on the go.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Well, Nancy, it's been a pleasure getting to know you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic. Appreciate it.
If you're a first-time novelist who is struggling to either finish your novel or get those revisions to where you want them to be, then I've got just the thing for you. I have a small group coaching program which runs over 12 months, and over the course of that program I will help you fix those plot problems that you've been struggling with. I'll help you get under the surface of your characters so you really get to know them and what's driving them. And crucially for you, I give you that self-belief that you need to get you through the roller coaster that is writing a novel, so that you can carry on, get to the end, and get your book, your story out into the world so it can change people's lives. If that sounds good to you, if that is something that you'd be interested in doing, I know I can help you get to where you want to be. So book a call with me. Let's have a chat and see if we are a good fit for each other. If you're interested in doing that, then go to emmadesi.com/story builder. I look forward to chatting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers. Hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.